Okay, so get this. We're diving into this super interesting audio today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 20 days out from this, really close election.
Right.
And Kamala Harris is in Detroit
Okay.
at a town hall.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's called We the People. It's with Charlemagne, thank God.
Okay.
And it was recorded on October 15th.
Gotcha.
And it is fascinating.
I bet. Especially with the timing, right?
Yeah.
Like 20 days out, that's not just a campaign stop. It's got to be strategic.
Totally.
This is her going into, kind of the lion's den, facing some tough questions with a host who's known for keeping it real.
Totally.
And an audience that's not afraid to speak their minds.
Oh, yeah. And he does not disappoint, let me tell you.
Oh, really?
Like, right off the bat, he calls her out.
What?
On the whole, like, is she relatable? Question.
Oh, that old chestnut.
Right. Like, he's saying, some people see her as stiff
Yeah.
or, relying on talking points.
Oh, so he's going there. Interesting.
Yeah.
How does she handle that?
Well, he even brings up...
I mean, that's got a sting, right? Especially with female politicians. It feels like that's always the question.
Right. And he even brings up the SNL parodies.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does she respond? Does she get defensive?
No, she kind of owns it, actually.
Interesting.
Like, she talks about discipline and how repetition is essential for getting her message heard.
So it's strategic? She's aware of the perception, but sees it as a necessity.
Yeah, you can totally see that tension there. Authenticity versus, disciplined messaging.
Oh, absolutely. It's the classic political tightrope walk.
Totally. And it makes you think, how do you connect with voters
Right.
when every word is, analyzed?
Especially in a place like Detroit, right?
Right.
Huge black population, crucial for Democrats.
Totally.
They need to feel like she sees them.
And Charlemagne even says, that he's been told that it's bad strategy to be too specific when talking to black voters.
Really interesting.
Because then it alienates other groups.
Oh, wow. So he's calling out that dynamic directly.
He is, and she actually responds to that directly, too.
What does she say?
Well, she emphasizes that she's running to represent everyone,
Of course.
but she acknowledges that, different communities face different challenges.
Right.
So you need targeted solutions.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you acknowledge those disparities without alienating more moderate voters?
Totally. And it's like, how does that actually play out when you get into the details?
Exactly. So does that balance work?
Right.
Does it resonate?
Right.
Let's look at how she handles the actual questions. Because I have a feeling Charlemagne and that audience did not hold back.
Oh, no, they jump right in.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, the very first question is
Yeah.
about foreign aid.
Ooh, okay.
And this caller is like, why are we sending money abroad when we need it here at home?
Okay, yeah, that's a tough one right out of the gate. You've got homelessness, you've got people struggling to make ends meet,
Exactly.
and she's supposed to justify sending money overseas.
Right. So how do you even address that? Do you go the empathy route?
Yeah.
Or, policy?
I mean, ideally both, right?
Yeah.
But it's a tough needle to thread.
Well, she tries.
Okay, tell me more.
She's like, look, America can and should do it all.
Okay.
But then she immediately switches gears.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It's like she comes armed with a whole list,
list.
of accomplishments.
Ooh, smart move. So she's not just defending foreign aid in principle, she's pointing to concrete results.
Exactly.
I like it. So what does she highlight?
A list of.
Of accomplishments.
Ooh,
So-
smart move. So she's not just defending foreign aid in principle, she's pointing to concrete results.
Exactly.
I like it. So what does she highlight?
Well, she talks about lowering drug costs.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one, especially for voters who are struggling.
Right. And she hits on specifics,
Yeah.
like the $35 insulin cap.
Oh, yeah, that was huge.
Right.
Smart to remind people of that.
And the $2,000 cap on prescriptions. Okay, so she's hitting those bread and butter issues.
Right, and then she mentions HBCU funding.
Makes sense, given her background.
Exactly. Look, I'm invested in these communities.
It's a subtle way to weave in her own story, which can be powerful.
Right, and it seems like that personal touch, it's part of her strategy.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. She did something similar when responding to the criticism about black churches, right?
Yes. When Charlemagne brings that up, she goes straight to her roots.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, Charlemagne's like, some folks say I haven't done enough to connect with black churches.
Oh, wow. He's not letting her off easy.
No, and she could have gone on the defensive,
Right.
but she doesn't.
Interesting. So how does she respond?
She talks about growing up in the black church.
Smart move. Humanizes her a bit.
Even mentions her pastor by name.
Oh, wow. Getting personal.
Yeah, it's like she's trying to create that connection.
Counter that narrative that she's somehow out of touch.
Exactly. And then, of course, she contrasts with Trump.
Okay, yeah. You can't talk about connecting with black voters without bringing him up.
Right. Like, it's this unspoken tension throughout the whole thing.
Totally, totally. Okay, so before we go any further,
Yeah.
we have to address the elephant in the room.
Oh, you mean the specifically for black people clip?
That's the one.
I mean, Charlemagne had to bring it up.
Right. I'm surprised he waited so long, honestly.
Me too, but when he does, her response is fascinating.
Oh, I bet. So does she own it? Apologize? What does she do?
Well, first, she denies it,
Okay.
calls it misinformation.
Right. Wants to set the record straight.
Yeah, like, that's not what I meant at all.
Which strategically makes sense.
Totally.
But then the question is, what does she do next? Does she just move on?
No, she goes into full-on fix-it mode.
Fix-it mode? What do you mean?
Like, she starts listing all the things she's done
Okay.
to address the needs of black communities.
Okay, so she's coming armed with receipts.
Oh, yeah, she's got data.
Like what? Give me an example.
She talks about black maternal mortality rates.
Okay, yeah, a huge issue.
And black unemployment.
Right, she's highlighting those disparities.
Exactly.
I know.
And she even brings up her opponent's plan, you know?
Which I'm assuming doesn't exactly prioritize these issues.
Let's just say she does not paint it in a positive light.
Okay, so she's drawing a clear contrast.
Totally. Like, here's what I've done. Here's what they're proposing. You decide.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very strategic. But it takes us back to that earlier point about politicians being afraid to be seen as doing too much for black voters.
Right, because it might alienate others.
Exactly, so the delicate dance, right?
Totally. And speaking of delicate,
Yeah.
there was a moment that got a little tense
Okay.
when a caller brings up police brutality.
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one. You could cut the tension with a knife on that issue.
Right, and this caller's not letting her off easy.
What do you mean?
Well, they specifically ask about the George Floyd Act.
Which, of course, stalled out in Congress.
Exactly, and they're like, okay, but what are you going to do about it?
Oh, wow, so they're calling for concrete action, not just words.
Exactly.
That's a tough spot to be in.
Right. And, I mean, initially she talks about how she helped write the bill.
Okay, so she's emphasizing her role in pushing for reform.
Yeah, but Charlemagne's not having it.
What do you mean?
He's like, well, if you were so instrumental, why did it pass?
Oh, he went there.
Yeah.
I like him even more now.
Right. So that's when things could have gone south.
Yeah, blame games rarely inspire confidence. So how does she handle that?
She does point the finger at Republicans.
Which, to be fair, is accurate. They did block the bill.
Totally. But then instead of dwelling on that,
She pivots.
she pivots to executive orders.
Okay, so she's talking about what the Biden administration was able to accomplish without Congress.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Right. And she rattles off a bunch of stuff like banning chokeholds,
Okay.
restricting no-knock warrants, and this is the big one, creating a national database to track police misconduct.
Ooh, that's huge.
Right. Especially when you think about officers just moving from one jurisdiction to another.
Absolutely. That's been a major obstacle to accountability.
Right.
So she's acknowledging the limitations of executive action.
Right.
But still highlighting what they've been able to do.
Exactly.
It's classic under-promising and over-delivering.
Totally. Which, in politics can be pretty effective.
For sure. Makes you wonder if they always intended to go the executive order route,
Yeah.
knowing Congress would likely be a dead end.
You know what's interesting?
No.
You say over-promising, right?
Yeah.
There was this moment in the town hall where
Yeah.
someone calls out politicians for this.
Oh, really? Like directly?
Directly. Like, this listener says that politicians make promises they know they can't keep.
Ouch. Yeah, that's got to sting.
Right. And they use this phrase,
Yeah.
volunteer lies.
Oof. That's powerful.
It is.
Okay, so how does she respond to that?
She doesn't.
She just lets it hang there.
Lets it hang there.
Wow. I'm actually surprised by that.
Right. Makes you wonder if it struck a nerve.
Maybe.
Like, maybe deep down, she knows that some of her plans,
Yeah.
rely on things she can't control.
That's the thing about campaigning on hope and change, right?
Right.
Sometimes those things are outside your control.
Absolutely.
Okay, before we get too far down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
we have got to unpack the reparations question.
Oh, yeah. That was a big one.
I mean, that's been debated for decades.
Totally. And there's a lot of, emotion tied up in it.
Right, especially within the black community.
So how did she handle it?
Oh, man, that question was like a live wire, You could practically hear the tension.
Right. Like, say you support reparations.
Yeah.
You risk alienating moderate voters.
Really?
But say you're against it.
You risk alienating a core constituency.
Exactly.
Lose-lose situation almost.
So how does she navigate that?
Well, she starts by saying that reparations have to be studied, which, let's be real, is a classic way to kick the can down the road.
Totally. But then she does something interesting.
What's that?
She pivots to homeowners.
Homeownership.
Homeownership.
Interesting.
Like, it's her solution for everything.
Everything.
Yeah, like reparations, homeownership,
Yeah.
closing the racial wealth gap.
Yeah.
Homeownership.
Interesting.
It's like her magic wand.
Right.
It's a bold strategy.
It is. It's like, she's not shying away from this idea of, like, economic justice.
Right.
But I do wonder if, for folks who see reparations as this, like, fundamental righting of historical wrongs,
Right.
is homeownership enough?
It makes you think about that whole volunteer lies thing.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, is she overselling this?
Right.
Is homeownership really the solution?
Right.
When you have all these other systemic issues.
Oh, exactly.
Like, she talks about giving $25,000 for a down payment.
Right.
Which sounds great.
Right.
But how many people does that actually help?
Right. And what about, like...
And what about, predatory lending,
Yeah.
discriminatory lending practices, all that stuff?
It's like, how do you fix that with just a down payment?
Right. And she mentions these issues, but her solutions feel very, like, individual.
Right. It's about, like, empowering people within the system.
Exactly.
Not necessarily changing the system itself.
Which, might resonate with some voters more than others.
Totally. Like, some people want more radical solutions.
Yeah, it's right.
And others might be like, no, this is pragmatic.
Exactly. It depends what you're looking for in a leader.
It's interesting, though, because even when she does talk about, systemic issues,
Right.
like when she's criticizing her opponent's policies,
Right.
it's framed as, like, intentional harm.
Oh, interesting. Explain that a little more.
Like, she's saying, these policies are designed to hurt Black communities, to
Right.
roll back progress.
Right.
But she's not really saying that. Like, maybe the system itself
Yeah.
was always flawed.
It's a subtle but important distinction.
Totally.
Makes you wonder, how far would she actually go?
Right. Like, if she's elected,
Yeah.
is she going to work within the system, or is she going to try to blow it up?
That's the question, isn't it?
And this town hall, I mean, it doesn't really answer that.
It doesn't, but it gives us a glimpse of how she thinks, how she communicates, what her priorities are.
It definitely gives you, like, a lot to process.
Oh, for sure. I know I'm going to be thinking about this for a while.
Me too. Like, there are things she said in there, and I'm like,
Huh?
hold on, I need to look into that.
Right.
Like, when she says that the Biden administration did try to pass immigration reform,
Oh, yeah, that was a bold claim.
and that Trump sabotaged it.
Mm.
Like, I want to know if that's true.
It's a good reminder, right, that politicians, even when they're being, raw and unscripted,
Right.
they still have an agenda.
Totally.
So it's on us to fact check.
To think critically.
Absolutely. Don't just take it at face value.
Especially not right now.
No, especially with an election coming up.
So, to our listeners out there.
Yes. To our listener.
Keep these things in mind.
Exactly.
Listen closely.
Think critically.
And stay engaged.
Yes, because ultimately, the choices we make,
Right?
they shape the world we live in.
They really do.
So yeah, stay informed, stay engaged, and make your voice heard.
Couldn't have said it better myself.